do you teach? So just briefly, when you think about class and teaching and why you're here, what group are you talking about?
Adult.
Okay, adult classes.
I'm a teacher of different people who have different ideas.
Yeah.
In the discussion group.
Okay. All right. Thank you. You acknowledge the diversity of people. Thank you. And what do you think?
I'm not a teacher at the moment.
Okay. Why are you here?
Learn.
Excellent. That's fair. Yeah. So maybe here in about 2.5 hours you'll want to be a teacher, or you'll. Okay. We'll see.
He has been.
Well, he's just been drafted. He doesn't know it.
Okay. Good. He's in the right spot. Okay. What classes do you guys think of? Is there a character to it, or an age demographic, or a affinity, or life stage, or anything?
We teach young professionals.
Okay.
Young marrieds, people just starting out in their careers and families.
Okay. Perfect. Anybody else at the table?
Well, we participate in the college class.
Okay.
And help with that, but I've recently been asked to do some teaching for the young families class.
Okay.
And so, and I don't know when that's going to happen, but we're here mainly to learn too.
Okay. Great. Excellent. And you guys?
We're here to learn.
Okay.
Hey, I taught in the summer classes.
Okay.
Some
I think you'll find that, and I know we're not finished with the question for everybody yet, but I think you'll find that while there are studies on learning styles, there are studies on learning purposes, that what humans have in common is greater than what makes us separate. Like, there are certain things that people like about learning. They like it when it's interesting, that's a kid or an adult. They like it when it's relevant, that's a kid or an adult. You know, they like it when it's often when it's social or when it's multisensory. That's a human thing, not necessarily a learning styles thing. So I think there's transfer in what we're going to say here. And what class or learning environment are you thinking about when you come here today?
Well, I'm an old retired chemistry teacher, and I just want to know how things are changing.
Okay,
But I
great.
like teenagers.
I promise not to make anything explode. Well, I can't promise that. I don't expect any explosions up here today. So, good, fair enough. And then you guys?
9th to 10th grade.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you got to be on. You got to
right.
have some good stuff.
Equip me.
Okay, all right, good, let's try. So, sometimes it's helpful to step back and take a look at what we're doing, because I teach, I taught the 5th grade class at our church, Highland Church of Christ in Abilene, last year with my wife. And then I taught our adult Sunday school class of people of all ages over the past semester. And then in the spring, I'm going to do that again. But in my job, I teach, right, at ACU. I'm a Bible professor at Abilene. And sometimes I get in a rut. Just day to day, it's like survival. It's like, okay, the next class. Sometimes I'm only a couple hours ahead of the students in reading, especially in Germany. When we were studying German history, I'm not an expert on German history, and so I would have read the books a couple hours before the students to teach them that. So, but it's good to step back now and then and not get in that rut and say, what am I doing? What works? What doesn't? And how can I do this better? And here's an illustration of why it's good to take a second look, because sometimes our initial perception is wrong about what we're doing. Oh, I'm a great teacher. I'm effective. I'm good. Well, okay. And I've had to ask myself that recently. Really? What makes a good or bad teacher? Which line is longer, A to B or A to C? A to C clearly appears to be longer, but it is a perception. The reality is that they are equal in distance. Are we okay? Have I stepped on anybody's toes yet? It forms an isosceles triangle. If you like tilted your head, you can see that, but the rest of the image kind of distorts it, right? Okay, here for example, some people see a spiral, but there's no spiral. They're just circles. Okay, but our perception says one thing. And I wonder as we teach, do I think, oh, I'm good, I'm great, I've got a couple good discussion questions, so I'm good to go. When our students sit through a class and say, oh man, that was terrible. Okay, so sometimes there's different perceptions. Or this one, this has been the cause of more arguments in some of my college classes than almost any other image I've displayed. Because the shape and size and area of the top of the right table is exactly the same as the one on the left. And I laugh because I know it just does not look like that is at all possible. This is in a book of optical illusions in the AC library, and I literally got a sheet of paper because I didn't believe it, put it on top of the book and traced one and then moved it over on top of the other one, and sure enough, it's the same. I show you this just to challenge your assumptions. Some of you said you're here to learn. Great, you're already in a good position. But if you, I want all of us, myself included, to be coming to this time willing to suspend our disbelief and consider new things and new ideas. So, Jesus was good at this. When he provided this equilibrium for the people, he said, you've heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. Or you've heard that it was said, do not murder, but I tell you, don't even be angry at the person. So there was this disequilibrium that Jesus was saying. It kind of knocked people off their feet. It got them to question again. And that's kind of what I want to do with us today. Here's an image of some folks at a conference, which disturbs me because this is 3 guys listening to the audio of a speaker who couldn't come. And so they're going to a conference to listen to a speaker, to meet a speaker, to talk, and then they're just listening to the audio. Why even be there together, I wonder?
And sitting on the back row.
Yeah, no, actually, right. I do like the idea that this guy's got a remote, so at any point he can like fast forward or stop. But look at all those speakers. Like, what is that? What would you say should go in this thought bubble? What is this student thinking?
Really?
Really?
When's it going to be over?
somewhere else.
Is it going to be? Over? I'd rather be somewhere else.
When can I get out of here?
When can I get out of here? I'm bored. Yeah. Some of you probably face some of these students. Maybe we're going to see some of these learners in our classes tomorrow.
How can I stay awake?
Yeah, help me stay awake. Yeah. Well, I face that a lot. And so how are we going to get learners in our classes engaged? And I want to throw that out as an idea to kind of cling to not just think about your content that you're preparing, that you're going to share, but think about engaging learners in the class time. Because my teaching and your teaching is important, but their learning is what we're really after, right? Teaching is a step towards their learning, the ultimate goal. We want them to learn. Because if no one was in this room and I spent 3 hours doing this presentation and talking like I'm talking now, it would be worthless if no one was in here and I was doing it just for me. Unless I was preparing for another time. But what I'm saying is, your learning is more important than my teaching. Even though quality teaching is essential to great learning. Okay, so I ask you, why are we doing this? Why are you going to stand up tomorrow morning in a Bible class and do what you do? Why are we teaching? What would you say? And I know the 2 questions are slightly different because why we teach may be different from what we're aiming for, but what would you say in answer to this if you had to answer the question, or one of these questions?
The thought that came to my mind with what are you aiming for was understanding.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and Jesus washes his disciples' feet, and he gets back up and says, do you understand what I've done for you? And so there's this expectation, this hope of understanding. What else?
One answer to why do we teach is because the scripture says we should.
We should, yeah. And you know what I like about the scriptures? It's challenging that to be a disciple of Jesus, he says, now go and make disciples of all nations. Okay, go make disciples, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. So there's an expectation that all disciples are, in a way, teachers. Now we know that some are uniquely gifted to teach large numbers or publicly, and James even says, hey, not many of you should become teachers because you'll be judged more strictly. So I understand there's a unique type of giftedness in teaching, but all disciples are supposed to be teachers in some way. Right, and you said?
We want to be a blessing in the lives of
Okay, to bless students. Thank you. Yes, I agree. And then there was another comment?
Make it applicable to everyday life.
Yeah.
And to that particular person that you're talking to, because everybody looks at these things differently.
Right. Relevant and applicable, and?
Make people think.
Sure. Yeah, there's a research study done in 1996 by this guy who studied youth classes and students who were faithful to God later on in life. And there was a correlation in his study between youth ministries and Bible classes that challenged thinking and then their later loyalty to Christ. Wow. Okay. So it's not broom ball and pizza parties, which I know you guys have a youth minister that understands that. But it's not broom balls and pizza parties that's going to get them to be faithful to Christ. Someone once said, what we win them with is what we win them to. It wasn't me, whoever said that. That's interesting. That's a good thought. Okay, let's win them with the gospel, with Jesus, with the church, with community, and they'll be loyal to that later. Okay, good thought. Do you have another thought?
Creating peaceful community too.
Okay.
The understanding and the learning and
yeah.
thinking and all that leads to peaceful community.
Okay, peaceful community. I like that. So I want to illustrate what education, successful, effective education done wrong would look like. Okay, but I also want to show you what the positive side will look like. So I'm going to give you the positive and negative. So my answer to the question is, we are partnering with God when we teach. And I need to acknowledge that as I stand up here today, I prayed before I got up here and I prayed last night, this morning, thinking, God, we're going to do this together, right? God, we're together on this, right? Because I would completely fall on my face if it weren't for God. We are partnering with God. Several times in the Bible it says we are God's co-workers. Teammates, collaborators, partners, colleagues. What word do you want to use? We are working together with God. That's kind of exciting. Because I've known group projects, and usually group projects in school, like there's a slacker, someone who doesn't do their job. Well, every now and then, that's kind of been me. Every now and then, I've been the slacker. And when the whole group comes together and pulls me along, and we get an A or whatever, I'm like, wow, that was grace. Because I didn't do my work, but we all got an A. That's kind of what it is with God. It's like your meager effort, your whatever, your mustard seed of faith, your mustard seed of effort, God can use to do amazing things. And so we're partnering with God. And I'm reminded of this verse in John. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So let us abide in Christ. Abide, remain in, remain with, and collaborate with, intentionally with God. Okay, we're partnering with God, and as we do that, we depend on the power of God. So Paul several times says, I struggle with all his energy, which works so powerfully in me. Paul acknowledged God's power and God's work and God's energy. So I exert effort, but God is infusing power to produce this great thing, which I'm thankful for, because it's not just dependent on you. When you teach your Bible class the next time, your effectiveness is not just dependent on you. It's dependent on God working through you. And those who serve should do it with the strength that God provides. God provides the energy. We do get some energy from cinnamon rolls and hazelnut coffee, but there's also this infusion from God. Now, we partner with God, depending on the power of God, and then you guys said this, for the transformation of people. We want it to be relevant. We want it to be applicable. We want it to be meaningful in their lives, or else, what's the point? Why are we trying to teach? The great hope of the gospel is that people can change. At 65, people can change. At 85, a person can change. At 15, a person can change. That's the hope of the gospel, that one's life can be transformed. We can become more like Christ. We are among Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us, teachers, that we're employing people on Christ's behalf to be reconciled to God, a peaceable kingdom. Reconciliation, a peaceable community. So, this is kind of what we're about as teachers. Now, we do that in lots of different ways, but I want to submit that to you as kind of what we're doing. So, I'm asking this question again in a different way. What type of people are we trying to make? And what does a maturing disciple of Jesus look like? Do you have an idea of what someone in your class, after having gone through the Kingdom Parables curriculum and sermon series and Bible classes, what should be different in their life at the end? And I think the goal should drive the activities that we do to get there. And I think we need to remember that. So does anybody want to just comment on this briefly? what type of people are we trying to make, or what does a maturing disciple of Jesus look like? Or, at the end of this Bible class series, what do you want them to do differently, or think differently, or feel differently? Anybody have an idea? Yeah, Bo?
Well, I don't know about this one because we're not doing this specific one in youth ministry right now, but the 3 courses that we are doing, I mean, that's where we start from, is what do we want them to look like when they're 18 and they're out of our, they may not go to
Right.
AC, they may not go to a Christian college, but that's kind of the starting point. And so, you know, we got one class is going to be focused on helping kids be able to say at the end of the class, I think this is where God's gifted me spiritually, and this is some areas that I need to exercise my gifts in.
Yeah.
And so that's the goal.
Yeah.
And so back up, how do we get there? And then another class is, you know, we live in an inhospitable world, but God calls us to be hospitable people. How can I help these kids understand what it's like to be hospitable in 13 weeks? What can we do to help them learn what Christian hospitality should look like?
Yeah.
So.
And this is, thank you, Bo, that's a great illustration. And what I want to challenge you with is this thought that all throughout this culture, people understand training. People understand that if I want to run a marathon, well, okay, let's talk to Casey for a second. Okay, if I want to run a marathon or a half marathon or whatever, how far in advance do I need to start running?
Like the day before.
Okay, sure, yeah, you're good. And you'll have a heart attack and die. Okay, thank you.
No, like 15 weeks.
15 weeks, okay. And there's a regimen, it's kind of outlined. People have kind of figured this out. If you want to run 26.2 miles or 13.1, whatever the case may be, then you back up, and here's what you do here. Here's what you do this week. Here's what you do this week, okay? And there's an expectation. Well, the same thing I think is true. If I said to you, I want you to get a bunch of, what did you say, 7th and 8th grade? 9th and 10th grade. Is it just boys or boys and girls? Boys and girls. Okay, okay, here we go. 9th and 10th grade, boys and girls in the same room, I want you to get them to meditate for 10 minutes during class, in silence, on scripture and prayer. Okay, you try that the first week, not gonna happen. Could you, how long would it take you to train them, to get them to all, boys and girls in the same room, to spend 10 minutes in silent meditation on scripture and prayer? It could be done. It has been done in other contexts, but how could you train them to do that? Okay, and for example, hospitality, how could you get them there? And the same thing with fasting. To get someone to fast for, let's say, 24 hours from food, there's a training regimen that could lead up to that, whereby you say, okay, we're just going to delay eating for 30 minutes. You usually eat lunch at 11:30, delay 30, eat it at 12. And then we're going to next time delay 45 minutes or an hour, so and then eat, and then you're just going to miss the meal altogether. Then you're going to miss that meal and delay the next meal, and then you can train and work up. What if we viewed what we do as teachers as coaches, and we're training them to do what about the kingdom? To live like a kingdom citizen, right? To act like Jesus acted, to act like a citizen, and the goal should drive what we do all leading up to that. Understanding, hear me say as much as I can in affirmation, understanding is vital. And in addition, we want them to understand and to apply it and live it. Okay. What I'm about to do is, okay. I said I was going to show you education done effectively, but for the wrong reasons. Education done very, very well, but badly. So here it is. If my ultimate goal is to have a large army of people loyal to the Führer who can engage in war in Europe to give the Germans a little more breathing room, what I'm going to do is start with young people. And I'm going to start with kids, and I'm going to get them loyal, and I'm going to have customs, I'm going to have language, I'm going to have propaganda, and I'm going to get them to be faithful to the regime. So that, this is 1933, so that, let's say 1939, I want to invade Poland. Let's say I want to, take over France, maybe even Great Britain. Then you've got to start early. And so on leaving school, first year school children say goodbye to their headmaster and teacher with the German greeting, which was co-opted and used by Hitler. And then youth serve the Führer, and Führer is a word meaning leader. But unfortunately, in the German language, you can't really use the word Führer anymore to mean leader, because of history and because of its so close tie, its association with Hitler. And so you've got these posters, this propaganda for this thing, that this is who we serve. And this is an officer of tomorrow. It's almost like the Boy Scouts, leading up to becoming a military officer. And I'm fascinated by the fact that we reproduce who we are, for good or for bad. And here's a replication of Hitler as a kid. And so this Knight's Cross medal winner is going to speak to the Hitler Youth, Major von Hirschfeld coming up, and all these kids looking longingly, admiringly to this person. So there's propaganda, there's language, there's systems in place to educate young people for military action and for loyalty. I'm saying it was really effective. Bad, morally, in my opinion, but effective. So effective that the American re-education camps had to exist. They had to re-educate the German citizens in democracy. Instead of just loyalty to a Führer, let's talk about representation. Let's talk about the political process. Let's talk about other ways of doing government. The Americans had to re-educate these prisoners of war who were the Germans at that time. Okay, so I found it very fascinating that education is important in our long-term goals, if you're in a government or if you're in a church. And what you're about to hear in just a second is from stuff you missed in history class. I found this in the German History Museum in Berlin, and I couldn't get a better picture that didn't have a reflection from the lights on it. But I wanted you to see, this is the way of the synchronized citizen. There was a plan. There was an expectation of here's where you're going to be, men and women at age 6, at age 10, at age 14, the People's School, Volksschule, and then you're going on so that at like 18, there's different types of work. You're in the Hitler Youth here, the Young People's Group, Hitler Youth, and then you join the Nazi Party at that age. Listen to what these people have to say about it.
Nazi indoctrination started in preschool. Children were encouraged to denounce their parents for making derogatory comments about Hitler or about the Reich. And at age 10, boys would register to join the German Young People after being investigated for racial purity. At 13, they could join the Hitler Youth. And at 18, they'd be a member of the Nazi Party. It was mandatory to serve either in the armed forces or in labor details until age 21. Girls did the same thing, participating in leagues that taught comradeship and motherhood.
Okay, so I'm not suggesting that we have to imitate this or even be as detailed as this, but I do think it's fascinating that there are some expectations of maturity, of moving towards a certain goal. And so, yeah, very few SS men were brought up as atheists, but none retained any teaching of their church. So says Simon Wiesenthal, who wrote The Sunflower. He's a Jew who was, put in a concentration camp, tortured, and writes this amazing little case study about forgiveness. Should I or should I not forgive a German SS guard who asked for forgiveness on his deathbed? But how do we help them retain the teaching of the church? How do we help them to be remembering and to living out? So again, why do we teach? What are we aiming for? Not what the Nazis were doing, back in the mid-20th century. We're doing something else, something more lasting, something more meaningful, something more important. What are we doing? So I want to ask you, if you had to pick the 10 most important Bible stories to accomplish your objectives, what are your objectives? To create what type of person? What would they be? Just go ahead and do that right now in your small groups. I want to give you just a couple minutes to think about that. See if you can decide on what are the most important Bible stories if you only had 10. And if you're struggling with this question, as a parent, sometimes I think about, oh wow, if I only had 30 more minutes to spend time with my kids before they left home, and this is all I was going to get to say, it's kind of that deal. What are the 10 most important stories? Where would you spend time in order to form the type of person you're trying to form as a church? Go ahead and do that now.
My mind immediately to the sermon. I think the reason the Taxonomy.
I thought it was good Samaritan.
you want to put it in what, that one? Over here?
And that would fit in.
Like Sunday about my brother told me way back
Cross conversion and that's,
so they Sunday night.
against God.
I didn't have to
Yeah. Kids are the Old Testament stories, they yeah. Hard ones. Hard ones are hard ones.
For the sake of time, just take about another 30 seconds to wrap up, even if you don't finish your 10.
There's a lot of information.
Jesus
He did, yeah. In scripture. Yeah. Somebody asked him, he said, yeah, love God and love others. That's what we're doing. Physical law. You know, he had a hierarchy.
Well, there were also
Okay, I want to hear what you've come up with so far. I know that maybe you didn't get to all 10, but this is an interesting exercise, I think, because it causes us to prioritize. Does anybody list Obadiah as one of your 10? Great little book. There's not even chapters, it's just like verses. Okay, no. All right. You made an educational decision. You made a value judgment based on what was a priority. Okay, and
I thought of Habakkuk, but I didn't say it.
okay, now there's a lot of great stuff in Habakkuk. That's fair. But Casey verbalized the point which I was making about Jesus. Do you remember what you just said?
Yeah.
What did you say?
I mean, Jesus himself had a hierarchy of what's more important than others. I mean, he did.
Yeah.
He said, love God and love others.
Yeah.
And that's, there are other things, but this is
Right.
more important than
Sure, exactly. And so,
Covers everything.
right, yeah. So Jesus did this. The first and greatest commandment was the question that was asked, and then he said, I'll throw in the second just for fun. The second one is like it. Okay, love your neighbor as yourself. Someone share with us your list, just briefly, if you have. I saw you guys had some. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, this is not necessarily in order of priority.
No, that's fine.
Prodigal son, resurrection, creation, birth of Jesus, Exodus, David, Samaritan woman, judgment, woman with issue of blood, and grace command.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm fascinated by several things. One, I wonder if there were a group of guys sitting around, if they would have chosen the same things you did. And maybe not. But here's the thing. we need that representation, that diversity. No, we need the diversity of that. And the second thing that's an observation I think is interesting is that you bounced back and forth from like Genesis, Exodus-ish, and Jesus. And I support that and like that. There's something about these stories that happened in Genesis and Exodus really that tell us so much about Jesus is doing. Do you remember that on the road to Emmaus, Jesus, on the day of his resurrection, meets these two people walking along the road, these two disciples? What are you guys talking about? Well, all the things that have happened in Jerusalem, don't you know? And he's like, well, tell me, what things? And they start telling him. Well, then Jesus starts telling them all the things that are written in the law and the prophets about himself, it says. Later in that same chapter, it says he opened their eyes so that they could see all that was written in the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, I think he even says, about Jesus. Which leads me to wonder what in the world is written about Jesus in the law and the prophets and Psalms. Apparently Jesus thought something was there, which is kind of cool. Okay, I say all that to say that the Old Testament is still valuable and important, and there's a lot there that helps us understand Jesus. Okay, another table, just your list of what you got. Somebody want to go? Go ahead, Bob.
Not any order again.
Okay.
Ephesians 4, the equipping passage, verse 1 through 20, Matthew
Okay.
5, and through 7.
Sermon on the Mount.
Great Commission. Exodus 20, which is the, I think it's 20, which is the Ten Commandments and the whole framing around all of that. Paul's conversion story. Luke 10, I send you out like sheep among wolves, that passage there, 1 through 12. The Last Supper, and the build up to the crucifixion, creation, and then new heaven, new earth, where we're going in the end, and then of course the love your neighbor, love God, love your neighbor. So.
Okay, excellent. Now I'm looking around. I'm looking and acknowledging that some of you have grandchildren, some of you have children. As a parent, I have to do this educationally. I have to think, okay, I have Bible studies with my kids. Instead of saying, oh, I need to have a Bible study, what should I do it on? I've backed up and said, wow, here are the parables I want my kids to know. Here are the stories about Jesus I really want them to know. And then I'll have to do is like look for nights to do these Bible studies. I've got the content. Instead of just having the form of, oh, I need to have a Bible study, what content should I use? I'm backing up saying, what's the whole reason for doing this? Because I want them to know Jesus. I want them to know the Bible. And I make this list of the verses I want them to have memorized, the stories I want them to know, and then I go do them.
Do you have different ones for different kids of yours?
Well, what's interesting is that, kind of our older two and our younger two group together in ways because they're 12, 10, 7, 4.
Personality.
No, exactly. It's different, right? And so we basically had to have sometimes Bible studies with the older two and younger two, really, is what we've done. My wife and I first struggled when Natalie was first born, and she was almost 2, and she was speaking well, and we struggled over what verse we should have her memorize first, and I was adamant that it should be children obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. She, however, trumped that and said, no, it should be Psalm 103:8. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in love. And so that was the first verse that all of our daughters have memorized, that one. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in love. The second command that they remember is children obey your parents in the Lord. And then there's a slew of others, obviously. Okay, is there anyone else who really wants to share their list?
Somewhere you're going to have to compare Moses to Christ.
Yeah, sure.
And bring in what problems each one of them caused.
Sure, so you could study the Transfiguration, perhaps, the law, Moses, Elijah, the prophets, Jesus, and then, show the connection. Well, you've played the game well. Thank you for participating in that activity. I wanted you to think about the chronology, the importance of those things. I'll tell you another way this plays out for me. As a Bible class teacher at ACU, I know that biblical illiteracy is real and it's happening, and young people don't know the Bible as well as they should, or they don't know it as well as they used to. Neither do the grown-ups. Well, so I've got these Bible majors who don't know the Bible as well. And so I've decided that in one of my classes, I'm going to start every class, and I've outlined, I did this past week, there's 30 class sessions. I'm going to do the prophets. I started with the minor prophets, but then I decided, no, just to do the prophets, because they kind of skip over that. They kind of know Genesis, Exodus, and some of the Kings, and then they come to the New Testament. And so I want them to know the prophets, major, minor prophets. And so I've selected 30 passages from the prophets that they're going to hear this semester. We're going to read them together and kind of talk about them at the beginning of class and then go on to whatever the class content is about, because they need to be exposed to it because they haven't been apparently in the past. So maybe that's just an idea I just want to share. Okay, my objectives for this whole day are for you to remember some principles of good preparation, which I'm going to get to after we take a break in a second. I want you to be excited about teaching and commit to doing it deliberately and intentionally. And I want you to try new things to the degree that you're willing to fail, because that's what risk is, trying it, and if it doesn't work, scrap it, do something else next time, but try something new. Okay, if you had to diagram for the engineers among us what it looked like, this teaching and learning process, I wonder what you would create. I'm going to give you my creation of an illustration of what it would look like. In the past, I used to think that teaching was me sharing content with you. It's so much simpler to view it that way, and so many teachers choose to teach this way. I'm the expert, I'll just give you the content, you just write it down, and we're good. I think teaching and learning is so much more than that. Okay, so here it is. Here's my anatomy of teaching. If I were to break this down into its various parts, I think the students are at the center. You are the most important thing in this room, because your learning is of utmost importance. So the student, the learner, is vital. Next, a learner encounters some subject. If you're on a desert island with a Bible, then yeah, I think you could find salvation. I think you could, well, according to Romans, I guess you could, be saved knowing God's creation without the Bible. But you, as a learner and the Bible without a teacher, can learn. Okay, student and content are important because you encounter content in Bible classes. But you are in a specific setting, in a certain place. In this place, there's food, there are beverages, coffee, and muffins, and then there's these scriptures, or at least there are these references to these concepts on the wall. Well, why is that? Why did someone choose to impact the setting with kind of a warm, inviting color and this art and flowers, and the setting's important. Someone knew that and recognized that. And how you manipulate the setting as a teacher is important too. I have come and manipulated the setting with sound and with images. With the daughter. I've impacted the setting in some ways, and you can do that too. And it's not just limited to a PowerPoint or keynote presentation, because you can print sheets of paper off and tape them to the ceiling, so that when your people come in your classroom and they're looking up and they see 30 different passages or words or whatever, they start wondering and start talking, and it gets their attention. So why don't we do that, or take them to the floor, or change something about the room this week to make the point? Bring in mustard seeds, whatever. Maybe they wouldn't notice because they're so small. I don't know. Do something else. But there's a setting. So you insert yourself as the teacher into this setting where a student is going to encounter the subject. And hopefully your presence assists rather than detracts from their learning. One of the things that you bring to the learning experience is your own life experience, your own passion. Like, why don't we just have students come to a Bible class and listen to a podcast? Because how you interact with Jesus is important for them to see and learn. How you learn about the kingdom of God and how you see it is important for them to hear. And how you live it out is vital. And so you bring a lot to it. But one of the other things you bring is you bring this authority. The students in your class, the learners in your class, have kind of all agreed socially, we will allow you to lead us during this class time. Right? Isn't that kind of what we all agree? There's people who are going to come to your class who, you're the teacher, so do something. Okay, you are a leader, and that's what I want to tell you. You are the leader of the environment. You can impact the environment. Okay, if you put stuff on the ceiling, make sure you don't rip off the paint or on the walls or whatever. Try not to, harm the building. But you can impact, you influence, you can manipulate in a positive sort of way. Oh, maybe a better word is orchestrate. You orchestrate the connections between the learners and their setting, because Casey and whoever else thought it was a good idea to manipulate the setting by having those refreshments. And we're thankful for it. Okay, that was a good manipulation of the setting. How can you manipulate the setting to help people learn? Okay, and you use strategies to do it. So far, I've asked you large group questions. I have had you listen to audio. I've had you look at images. I've had you create a list of, so there's some things I've had you do. These are some of the strategies that you can come and bring. Now, by God's power, we hope that the Holy Spirit is present. God is present and blessing all this. That God's Spirit is present. And so, I submit this to you as one way of viewing what happens. And there are those who say that the best chess players can chunk things. They see images, they see patterns, they see... I think people who learn in a discipline can chunk information in ways that they know where to hang new information or put it. I wanted to show you this so that you could kind of chunk what teaching and learning is and kind of see, oh, I've spent all of my time studying content in preparation for class. I've spent all my time right here. Maybe I need to think again, who are these people that I'm teaching? Or maybe I need to think, wait, what is the setting that I can manipulate? Or maybe I need to think, once I've studied and studied and studied and prayed and studied, how could I help them encounter this material in a way that they're going to actually learn it or live it? Now, yes, I just gave you a little bit more work to do rather than just study and go share. But the payoff is worth it. Just that little extra time, or that starting a little extra early, is going to be worth it to just think a little bit about how could I influence the setting or the subject or the strategies. Okay, reaction to that?
I fall into this trap for sure, that it's easy for me to get in my office and study something for a week,
Yeah.
and then go teach it.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to get to know the students
Yeah.
that need to hear it.
Right.
Because I can design a lesson and think, okay, what is the kingdom parable? What do college students need to know about the kingdom parables?
Yeah.
Or what does Rebecca need to hear this week?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
What does Anthony need to hear this week? And back to our discussion of the list of kind of our canon of what we would teach. If I have a new Christian who's a college student, I start in the Gospels.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't start in Genesis and just go through the Bible with
Right.
them, because I think we need to read the Old Testament through Jesus, obviously. So I start with the Gospels. Now, if I have a student that grew up in church, I might start somewhere else because they know some of the stuff already.
Right.
So just to your point of, it's a whole lot easier just to focus on the subject and study, but it takes time and energy to think about this student and this student and this
Yes.
student, and that's going to change all the time.
Right.
Who's going to be, especially for me and Bo, we have students
Right.
coming in and out all year long, and
Right.
that takes a lot of time and energy than just the subject.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Casey. What else?
I would say the other thing too that makes me think about is getting back to the setting. I mean, I can do all sorts of stuff with the tangible environmental factors,
Yes.
but I have parents that shove kids into that setting who don't want to be there, who manipulate the setting.
Yeah.
Right.
I know you've dealt with this.
Yeah.
You know, and you could and considered it, just bye-bye.
Kick 'em out.
Because they're manipulating. And
Right.
one of the comments that I've used is you're preventing me from sharing Christ with somebody to get out.
Yeah.
And sometimes that helps, but it comes back to that. I think that I need to be more, I wouldn't use the word harsh, but in knowing my students, know which ones may not need to be in there because it's not beneficial to them, it's hurtful to them,
Right.
and it's hurting other people, and that's a tough thing to
Yeah.
do versus just going in and saying, I'm going to present it, and if you soak it up, you soak it up. If you don't, you don't.
Right. Well, and if you value that time, if this is important to you, some of those kids are going to figure that out and learn, and then they're going to help police each other, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
This is children's ministry.
Okay.
This is,
Yeah.
you know, you can't, it's not about the subject, it is about the students. And, you know, just about a year, not a year ago, about 6 months ago, I completely scrapped how I was doing children's church. Because the kids that had been in children's church when I first came here, they were used to how children's church was and whatever. I had to completely change it because my kids were completely different.
Yeah.
And they couldn't do what we had been doing, and they needed to move around and experience their environment differently. And
Right.
so, I mean, you just change. You have to, who's in the class and how did they learn best, and
Yeah, absolutely. And you can't just like tell kids something for an hour. You've got to engage them. And I want to say that big kids, those who are like 70, are kind of the same. Yeah. You can't just tell them something for an hour. Yeah, we have more of a tolerance for it because we've been doing it for so long. But I've built up this great resiliency to someone speaking at me for an hour. I can like days.
It was like 5 minutes to 10 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right.
That's what we trained you to do. Listen.
That's right. Yeah, you trained me to sit still for an hour. I wouldn't necessarily say I listened well. But.
Yeah, and this is our traditions, particularly Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
We're very head knowledge.
Yeah.
And even our language. The place we meet over there is called an auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
Auditory.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We sit and we listen. So why would we expect anything different?
Should be called an activity center, right?
Yeah, right? I mean, think about Jesus. People walked around and he did
Yeah.
things, and it was very
Yeah.
different than sitting and listening.
Right.
He didn't have an auditorium.
Right.
Walked around.
Exactly. Okay. Oh, yeah, something else. Go ahead.
You're going to have to get somebody to work in different questions, because if you watch your master teacher, he always asks questions
Yes.
about what they thought.
Yes.
And if you can get people in telling you what they think, then it is going to impress them a lot more on what you are talking about.
Okay.
If you can get them to internalize it.
Yes. There was a dissertation done back in 1984, and the person who wrote the dissertation claimed that Jesus asked 219 different questions in the Gospels. I submit to you that Jesus knew the answer to every single one of those questions. He didn't ask a question he didn't know the answer to. And I think great teachers, they do the Socratic method, right? It's I ask you a question that I know the answer to. I want you to think through and find the answer and share it for your learning, not for my benefit. So we can acknowledge that Jesus did it for their benefit. Okay, Caesarea Philippi. Hey, who do people say the Son of God is? I mean, Jesus knows what people are saying, but they're like, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. That's what people are saying. He follows it up. Next question. Okay, what about you? Who do you say I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, Son of the living God, right? Okay, Jesus knows the answer to the question, right? But he asked it anyway. Okay, you're blessed. Good job, Peter. You got it right. Okay. It seems like, yes, the Socratic method is important and valuable to ask questions. In addition to that, Jesus did many, many, many more things. He told parables, even without a question. He told parables that were hard to discern and some people didn't understand. He condemned people. He affirmed people's faith. He challenged inappropriate behavior. He sometimes would be silent and leave a place and walk away. So yes, Jesus had many, many different teaching strategies. Yeah. Let's pause and take a break. I don't know, 5-8 minutes, whatever you need to do, and then we'll come back and keep going.